So looking at production methods now for Unit 1, and we're going to be looking at job production and batch production, but flow production is a production method, but that comes into Unit 2, so I won't be looking at this for this presentation, or won't be looking at that for this presentation even. So we're going to be describing what job and batch production actually are and explaining when they're appropriate to use. But to be able to explain when they're appropriate to use, we need to know the pros and cons of each method. So key definitions now. Job production is making a one-off specialised product for each customer, so it's a product that fits their needs completely, that they, you could sort of say that the customers in some ways designed the product themselves, whereas batch production is making groups of identical items that pass through different stages of the production process at the same time. So rather than just a one-off, you're going to be making these groups of products that are all going to be in each group identical, but you can vary it between the groups and the batches. So I'll show you what I mean later on when we look at some examples. But when we're looking at job production, if you make a personalised birthday cake, you put your friend's name on it, and it's all of their flavours that they like and the colours that they like, that would be job production. You're making a one-off, you're fitting it towards their needs. We've got here an example of a very decorative, ornate conservatory, and this has been designed to fit in with the house there, and it's been designed specially with those measurements to be appropriate for that house and that style of architecture as well. And then the Channel Tunnel, another example of job production, because it was in itself a project, although there were tunnels like that in the world. I think they're based on a Japanese design, I think, and they had many tunnels that are similar, but they wouldn't have been the same. They wouldn't have been the same length or boring through the same kind of rocky surface. Or I'm making it sound like I know a lot about the Channel Tunnel, but I don't really. But what I do know is that there's job production, and it was produced for that specific need. Actually, the machines that bored through the rock or the sediment or whatever it is at the bottom of a sea, there were two machines, and they started one off from the English side and started one off from the French side, and sort of ditched one of the machines halfway through when the tunnels had both had met up with each other. So you can see one of the problems with job production is you need very specialized machinery for the job as well, and it's going to be quite expensive. So let's have a look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of job production. So as I said before, it meets customers' requirements and it's completely customised. Workers can be a little bit more motivated than the other methods of production as well, because they need to use a variety of skills to complete the job, and this can be very motivating. You feel like you're problem solving, so it can be quite a fulfilling job for somebody working in job production methods of manufacturing. The organisation is going to be fairly simple, certainly when we compare it to batch production and flow production. Depends what it is though. I imagine the Channel Tunnel was quite difficult to coordinate, but if we're thinking about just making one cake as opposed to making 3,000 cakes in one day, the organisation is going to be much more simple if you're just making one and to meet to one customer's specific needs. However, labour costs are going to be very high because you've got those skilled workers. You're not going to achieve economies of scale like you would do with flow production or possibly with batch production. So that means higher average costs. And the time between the customer ordering the product and then receiving the product, that known as lead times, that's going to be quite lengthy. So completing the project, maybe even getting the revenue, that's going to be quite difficult. There's going to be maybe cash flow problems in between starting and then receiving the money. And your sales costs also might be quite high. Now this is not something that most students will think of, but because you're customizing the product and you have to meet the needs of the customer, you need to gather that information. So your sales assistants are going to have to gather that information. So think about back to that example of the conservatory. say. If you were making a completely personalised, customised conservatory to fit onto a certain type of house, a certain type of architecture, you'd have to gather all of that information about what they want and their budget and all of those types of things. And you'd need to know quite a lot about conservatories to be able to explain to the customer, because the customer might not know themselves what they want, and you need to go through all of the options with them. So that's going to be quite a skilled job itself. So here we look at batch production. Now, I always think about bakeries when I think about batch production, because they'll make multiple of the same type of product, but they'll make different batches of it. So here we've got this kind of circular ring of twisty bread. I'm not too sure what it is, but it looks really good. And then we've got more blobs, I don't know how to describe that, of bread, more like loaves, small loaves, or small rolls, and then this giant roll here, it looks like, and some other things more like flat bread down there. But bakeries will make up big batches of this. They'll mix up their dough and then lay it in shape on the baking trays and then put it in, and you'll get identical baking trays worth of different products. And then here we've got a chair manufacturer, and maybe one day or 1 week what they'll do is they'll make hundreds of that type of chair, and then the next day they'll make a different design. I actually went to visit Ben & Jerry's in America when I was over there, and that was really interesting. They were making Cherry Garcia when I was over there. It was very tasty. It was really, really nice. But they were making it in big vats, and that was batch production. And they told me that they would spend about 2 days, 48 hours worth of time making just that flavour. And then I think the next flavour they were going to make was a sort of chocolatey flavour. I can't remember the exact name, but they're making in batch production as well. Okay, so some of the advantages of batch production: it's still fairly flexible, still when we compare it to, say, flow production that's coming up in Unit 2, because you can have some customization, so you can vary the product between the batches, but the products in the batch will all be the same. You can have more specialisation and division of labour as well with batch production, so employees can concentrate on one operation, and therefore you might need fewer really highly skilled employees, and they can also be a little bit more productive if they're getting that practice and focusing on one skill at a time. And there's less variety of machinery is needed. You probably don't need the same costly machinery. I'm just thinking about the Channel Tunnel with that type of machinery, and if you are producing individual products each time, you're going to have to invest in technology or machinery that's ultra flexible to be able to meet different types of needs. If you are getting a machine that's all they'll ever do is just one function, that's probably a little bit cheaper to do. And you can also part make the product as well, and store them, and then if you need to do some form of customization at the end, you can do. Whereas with job production, you couldn't do that because it was all very individual and it fit the individual customer's needs as well. So this advantage here can actually reduce lead times and get the product to the customer a bit sooner. It is going to be a little bit more difficult to coordinate and to plan, and the machinery and the workers possibly could be idle for a period of time. So I'm just thinking of brewing in the case of beer and things like that. But also, I do remember when I was at the Ben & Jerry's factory, they told me that they were going to make the Cherry Garcia for 48 hours, but then they had about 48 hours or 16 hours or something of cleaning the machines, and they have a really, a deep clean kind of process. So when they're doing the cleaning, which is obviously very, very important, but some of the machines aren't actually on and making it, and the reason that they have to clean them so meticulously is because they were going to make the other flavour the next day. So if the machines were just making that product, I'm just thinking of kind of flow production when it's only producing one type of product, then they wouldn't have to have that intensive cleaning. So you do get idle machinery for a while. You may need more complex machinery as well, because you're probably producing on a much larger scale. It depends what it is, because you can see this one here maybe contradicts with that one. It just depends on what type of business you're looking at. The workforce as well, the workforce even could be less motivated because there's a lot of repetition of work. It does depend on whether the batches are big in terms of whether it really significantly reduces your average costs. If they are quite small batches, the costs are likely to be quite high anyway, but usually batch production is going to be a lot cheaper than job production to do.